James Traficant was a member of the House of Representatives for over 15 years. His flamboyant style and dedicated opposition to illegal immigration made him one of the most colorful representatives of modern times. In 1983, he was charged with racketeering for accepting bribes. He represented himself in the criminal trial, arguing that he accepted the bribes only as part of an undercover investigation into corruption, and he was acquitted of the charges, becoming the only person ever to win a RICO case while representing himself. In 2002, Congressman Traficant faced charges of using campaign donations for personal use. A court convicted him on the charges and sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison. The House then expelled him as a member. Congressman James Traficant, even though you're not a congressman anymore, you've earned the title. Welcome to the Global Freedom Report. Jim, how are you?
Good, Brent. I'm getting a little bit of a feedback on the air. I don't know if anybody else, but it seems to be a delayed feedback of your voice. So can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. I think it's a Skype thing, and there's not much we can do about it. Try and put it out of your brain. You know, like some of the politicos you had to deal with in those days.
Yeah, it's like a doublespeak. I'm used to that. People speaking out of both sides of their mouth. But not you, but it certainly sounds that way with the feedback coming. But I want to tell you something. Your assistant out there, Lee Parker, is really a great lady. She ran me down and made sure she found me.
Fantastic. Yes, Lee is a great producer. I couldn't do what I do without her. Hey, I didn't know this, but in 1963... you were drafted number 276 by the Pittsburgh Steelers. What was it like playing in the NFL?
Yes, I was a quarterback. I was a quarterback at the University of Pittsburgh. I tore my knee up and my arm, and I never got too much of a chance, but I was drafted by the Steelers coming out of the University of Pittsburgh. My sophomore year, I was teamed up with Mike Ditka, a good friend of mine, he was the coach of the Bears and a Hall of Famer, and it brings back a lot of old memories. So Pittsburgh is a great town, and the Steelers are still doing a fine job.
Wow. I knew that you were kind of bulky guy, but I had no idea. That's amazing. I think that's terrific. You have to have stories to tell your children and grandchildren around being in the NFL.
Yeah, well, when I was coming out of high school, I was the number one pick of Notre Dame University. And I was all set to go to Notre Dame, and Notre Dame fired their head coach, Terry Brennan, on Christmas Eve, and all of the kids that were lined up to go to Notre Dame with new coaching staff didn't take any of Brennan's recruit. So it was the only major school that I couldn't go to, if you will, and it was really a downer. I wanted to go to Notre Dame real bad, but I'm very honored that Terry Brennan selected me as the number one pick in the entire country. Naturally, he got fired, so I haven't had the best of luck on some occasions.
Terry Bradshaw, eat your heart out. When you were sheriff of Mahoning County, Ohio, did you understand your constitutional powers allowed you to block federal violations of the people you were elected to protect?
Well, let me tell you this. I understood very well the powers of a sheriff. In fact, one of the things that sort of highlighted my career, and it wasn't meant to highlight it, it just naturally evolved, was we had a real downturn in the economy, and we lost 55,000 steelworker jobs in this valley. Well, I was sheriff, and all these homes are coming up for foreclosure, and a black woman came to me, and she only missed one payment, and they were foreclosing on her home. Now, she had a 4% mortgage, and she had paid 24 years on that 30 years, and the current interest rates were about 14% under those Carter years, and 1 month they were foreclosing on her home. So I looked into it, and the law was very clear. It said, sheriff shall sign the transfer deed. In other words, once the thing is foreclosed, the sheriff has no say. He's compelled by law to sign a transfer deed. So I thought a while, and I said, well, you know, I'm just not going to sign the transfer deed, and I'm going to try and put this to a crisis, see if I could help these folks. Well, the way it worked out, they put me in jail around here, but it brought attention to it, and before it was all over, they settled it. They were very embarrassed, and a lot of people saved their homes. Now, one of the things I did when I went to Congress is I passed housing counseling legislation where the banks have to give a 45-day notice before they foreclose, They have to give the 800 number of an agency that can work out the problems between a borrower and the lender. And even some of the major newspapers who never gave me much good press admitted that it was one of the great programs. So, as a sheriff, you have tremendous powers, and I, in fact, took 21 FBI agents to a federal hearing in Cleveland on probable cause for theft and violation of civil rights in this valley. I actually put them into court over the issue, and naturally they let them get away. And that's one of the problems in the country. The federal government is going unbridled. When they commit a crime, they investigate themselves. And quite frankly, we have a government that's predicated upon fear, and it will not work, and it will ultimately implode. It is denigrating day by day to an awesome, powerful central government program that is forcing Americans, and most Americans don't understand it until they're hit with it. But the basic rule of thumb, starting with the Internal Revenue Service and the administrative agencies of our government, is to fear the American people. And fear does nothing but breed contempt and problems, and that's what's going to happen in this country.
No argument there. I'll give you a little tidbit, though, from my own legal research. The word shall, when it is in law, is actually not mandatory. It is not compulsory. Mandate is compulsory. Must is compulsory. Shall is not. Just an interesting little wrinkle there. Have you ever considered another run for sheriff, by the way?
No, I'm prohibited from seeking any office, save federal office, by the laws of Ohio. I was the number one target of the Justice Department since 1983, when you brought out that I was the only American in history to ever defeat them in a RICO trial, pro se, full jury verdict, representing himself. And they couldn't live with that, Brent. They couldn't live with that.
I'm sure they couldn't.
Then, no, I was the congressman that brought back John Demjanjuk from Israel, who was convicted of being Ivan the Terrible. Now, he was convicted and sentenced to death to be executed. When I got involved in the case, because the case, they said, was so sensitive, no one would look into the matter. And when the family came to me and they made their appeals to me, they said, look, we've never even had a parking ticket. What kind of country is this? We can't even talk to anybody. The son came and the son-in-law. And I looked into the matter. I told him when we started, I said, look, if your father's guilty of this heinous crime, I could go pull the switch myself. But the bottom line was the newspaper said, Traficant supports Nazi mass murderer, Ivan the Terrible. Well, the bottom line was, when I got involved, that publicity ended up damaging the government very bad, because there were whistleblowers within the government that knew that I was not a rubber stamp congressman, that they could probably send me something and I would use it, and they did. And I eventually got the documents and the evidence to prove he was not Ivan. And let me tell you how bad it is, though, Brent. The Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati wouldn't accept my evidence, and Congress wouldn't hold a hearing. They said it's too sensitive. And I said, since when does sensitivity waive the Bill of Rights? My God, this man's going to be put to death. He's not Ivan. Well, I send the information over to the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Israeli Supreme Court invited me and the family over. And when I'm over there, I did an interview with Brent Gumbel on the Today Show back then. And I said, if Israel puts this man to death, they're going to lose $25 billion a year from the American taxpayers. And he said, Brian Gumbel said, what do you mean, Congressman? He said, they only get $3 billion. I said, only $3 billion. I said, $3 billion is $5,000 for every man, woman, and child in Israel. I said, but that's only one bill. How about loans? Loans converted to grants, economic assistance, military assistance, trade compacts. I'm saying to you, and I told him, they get 20 to 25 billion a year from the American taxpayers, 40 to 45,000 for every man, woman, and child in Israel. He said, well, thank you, Congressman. Brent, that night I got a call in my hotel room in Jerusalem from the Israeli Supreme Court that said, we will deliver John Demjanjuk to the airport in Tel Aviv. Take him home. I brought him home. Now, when I get into New York, I called a press conference. While they all rushed to the press conference, I got him in a little one-engine plane and flew him to Ohio quietly. But the bottom line was, Brent, when we landed in New York, the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati issued a press release that said, a tragic but honest mistake by our government. There was no honest mistake. The evidence I got came from the Justice Department. They knew he wasn't Ivan. That unit was going to get their funds cut, and they were going to let an innocent man die. They hated me. As a result, I was the #1 target, Brent, of American Institute Public Affairs Committee, and that's why I went to prison, believe me.
I've got to tell you, I just got a comment out of our chat room. You have to hear this. Now, this man should be on every week. Not the likes of Barr and Keyes or even Ron Paul. This man deserves his own show. This is the best guest Brent has ever had in my book. The rest of them are pansies compared to this man, and his record proves it. They're speaking about you, Jim. And by the way, before I go on,
I really appreciate I appreciate those comments. But you you look back at my record, you'll see in March of 1993, I made the speech about the Federal Reserve. Read that speech I made in March of 1993. If you give me an address.
I remember some of the
stuff.
Well,
let me tell you what. From there came all of the issue on this Federal Reserve. Now, just let me give you my opinion right to the point. Why are we indebted to these international bankers? The Constitution, we're not adhering to the Constitution. We shouldn't be auditing the Fed. The audit is going to turn out just like the Kennedy assassination information that's been put away for 75 years. It'll be in there what they want in there. All this audit is going to do is reconfirm the Federal Reserve as the best thing since sliced bread. We should eliminate the Federal Reserve. And we can put together our own program where these repeat suits can report to Congress, and we could run and we could monetize our own money and coin our own money. Failing to do this, let me tell you this, Brent. They always say every election, America's at the crossroads. America's not at the crossroads. America's at the cliff. And this thing called fear that predicates from the tax code and the Internal Revenue Service is where the problem lies. America is in dire straits because now they're talking about taxing the rich, and I laugh about that because my father was just a truck driver, and I was born very humble family here in Samuel Street. He told me, Jimmy, he said, I never worked for a poor guy. And the point he was making is if people don't invest money, people are not going to work. Why would you invest money in America? They've already taken their factories out. They can't make money. Now they're talking about taxing the rich. Let me tell you, the rich are going to take their money out of the country.
Yeah, of course.
This is all screwed up. We've got to eliminate the tax code, get rid of the Internal Revenue Service, and move America to a flat consumption tax that everybody pays. Even the visitors from Japan and Germany that go to Broadway in Las Vegas would pay into our Social Security and Medicare. Even all the drug dealers on the street, even all the illegal immigrants that are in here would be paying taxes. And everybody's got to pull this load. And we take the burden off the American people. There is no such thing as freedom. I listened to your opening, the Global Freedom Report. Let me tell you something, Brent. Freedom is something the American people do not know and understand because we're not free. You need to think about our tax system, a tax system of fear and punishment. Even in the local area, if you take care of your home, your taxes go up. If you let your home run down, your taxes don't go up. So you're rewarded for not taking care of your home. You're penalized and punished for improving your home. And it's the same thing with the federal tax system. It's time to throw it out. It's created class warfare. And one of the last bills I had, coupled with a brilliant Republican from Louisiana, Billy Tozan, it was called the Federal Retail Sales Tax Program. And here's how it works. A lot of people panic. It's a straight, flat 25%. But before you panic, Harvard did a study and says 25% of the cost of most manufacturing is complying with the tax code. They said if they implemented the tax, there'd probably be no appreciable increase in prices as we know them. But here's how it would work. There'd be no more withholding, no more income tax, no more Internal Revenue Service, no more corporation tax. Corporations don't pay that tax. They pass it on to the consumer anyway. No more capital gains tax. No more inheritance tax. No more tax on savings. No more tax on investment. You buy a home, yes, you're going to pay the tax. But keep in mind that the 25% cost factor that goes into building that home is going to be reduced by getting rid of the Internal Revenue Service and that awesome tax code. And it's all simple. There's no more forms. And there's one other thing, Brent. America's experiencing approximately a $750 billion a year trade deficit. I'm not just talking about budget deficits now. We buy more than we sell. We're going to blow up. This would be the first border-adjusted tax in our history. For example, a car made in Ohio under this law would be shipped overseas. It carries no load in America. Now it carries a 25% load. Where's it going to sell overseas? Now, that car coming from overseas They come in here scot-free. They don't even have the 25% load that's on the domestic product. It'll be the first border-adjusted tax in our history. It's not protectionist, Brent, because, number one, all of our people pay it. They pay the same as us. I make this statement to you because I know this is only a half-hour show. If America does not eliminate the IRS, throw out this burdensome tax code, this punishing instrument, and put a reward system into America, America will implode. I predicted by the year 2030. Pat Buchanan, as I believe, predicted by the year 2020. Yeah, Brent, let me just say this. I want to say this. You know, this last trial where they put me away, 4 of the 7 people, actually 6 of the 9 people have already admitted they were pressured to lie. There was no physical evidence. It's the first case in American history where a person was convicted without a fingerprint. The government said they didn't even make a tape recording of me. In 6 years' investigation costing $15 million, involving over 250 agents, about the time they were blowing up our trade center and the Pentagon. Now a Secret Service guy come out and said it was a hoax. They couldn't even got an indictment against Traficant. They wouldn't even take him to an indictment. They said he was a political prisoner. And I knew that. I knew that when the Deminick case happened, that would happen. But you know what? I could have got out of prison in 6 months. All they had to do was say I was guilty. You know what I told them? I can't tell you the exact words, but I told them to shove that pardon somewhere where the sun don't shine.
Good for you. Jim.
And I did all that time.
As a House member, you had a unique perspective on the workings of government and the internal politics involved with every action and decision taken by elected and appointed officials. What are your thoughts on the growing presence in American cities of military equipment and troops and the increasing brutality of police forces throughout the country?
Well, you're seeing the evidence of an America that's beginning to unravel, and no one's really looking at the problem. Everybody's talking about the symptoms, and no one's looking at the causation. You have basically a dependent underclass in America that has learned to live off the government, and the government cannot satisfy all of their needs. And you're going to have these impoverished areas where you're going to have continuous blight and problems where a lot of our policies are manifested from parentless homes, kids running wild, to tell you the truth, and the policies of our country that have allowed for this to happen. I mean, you don't want to get into the issues of all of these controversial things. I don't mean to do that. But the bottom line is, if the family is not a pillar, then there is no stabilization to any society. And you're seeing an erosion of the American family, slowly but surely, and you're seeing a degradation of it and an institutionalization of it by basically promoting a lifestyle that may not necessarily be family-oriented. So, yes, I think that there is some cases of police brutality, and there's probably some issues of military involvement, and I think the government is very concerned that this thing can blow up at any time, and you can have a full-blown riot on your hand like we had back in the 60s. So I think you're seeing the manifestation and the mobilization of these types of systems to warrant and protect us against those. Unfortunately, I think that day is going to come when it's going to happen.
Well, I'm confused because the Posse Comitatus Act was supposed to prohibit military from participating in civilian areas, yet we see it all the time. We see these so-called anti-terrorist exercises in towns around the country almost every week, it seems. Whatever happened to the federal laws prohibiting that?
You know what, Brent? Terrorism is just a new word for communism. In the old days, someone hollered communist and Groucho Marx duck fell down out of the sky. Now the buzzword is terrorist. If there's a problem, holler terrorist, and it'll account for more government intervention. It's gone too far. In fact, our one-sided foreign policies over there in the Mideast have, in fact, imported terrorism to our very shore. We've become entangled in too many political affairs outside of our own country, where our own country is going to hell in a handbasket. It's time to retrench. We were in 2 wars that we should never have been in. They bankrupted us. They made enemies for us. And now there is a strong push to move us into Iran. God forbid. It's time to retrench. Get back to America. Take a look. Start rewarding people. Put people to work. Like the bill that I talked about. There'd be no welfare. You would take your pay stubs or lack of a pay stub to a government. If you're under the poverty level, the government would assign you to a job. Period.
What a concept.
And this is the way it's got to be. That's the way it's got to be, Brent. And we've got to break this cycle of dependency.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. What do you think about the way the Republican National Committee committed overt fraud by changing GOP rules at the last minute to obstruct a Ron Paul nomination, especially how Speaker Boehner read from a teleprompter that the ayes had it while the nays were far louder and that there were no objections even while numerous objections were being voiced?
I didn't like it. I think Ron Paul is a great guy. He's a stand-up guy. Quite frankly, I think Romney would have been smart to put him on that ticket. I don't think he had enough steam, and no offense to Ron, I don't know if he has enough fire in his belly at this point. But his policies and his demeanor and his attitude are that of a great American. I think it would have been a real compliment on the bottom side of that ticket with whomever was nominated. But contrary to that feeling, I think they went beyond Ron because Ron is now starting to test some of the things that I've tested, and he's starting to produce comments and produce some controversy for the powers that be, both parties, that they don't like it. But that's neither here nor there. America was once the landscape of political controversy where all sides interacted and you worked out and you come to some sort of consensus. And I think that I didn't like the way the GOP moved him out of the way and silenced him and tried to make his supporters look like they were sort of left field type of supporters. And that's very unfortunate, but that is the truth, the way it happened. And that may come back to harm the Republicans very much so, because those are Republicans that support Ron Paul. Let there be no question. And there are independent Democrats that support, and moderate Democrats that supported Ron Paul, more than the press would like to have us know. But now we have to take a look at the press, too, and we have to take a look at what's happened to our country. Now, I have taken much heat because I've been called an anti-Semite for the following reason. I said that Israel has too much control over the policies of the United States. I'm not anti-Israel. I'm not anti-Semite. And I think Israel is going to end up hurting themselves by pushing America and utilizing their power base through the media in this country. And I think one of the problems that Ron has is he is not a favorite son of American Israel Public Affairs Committee either. I was their number one target in the early 90s. In fact, they couldn't beat me with a gun, Brent. They put me in prison. That's the bottom line. Now, 6 of the 9 people have come forward in my last trial and admitted they were pressured to lie. And the judge says, well, we can't revisit the trial. This is really a hoax in America. This is no good. And I think that the Ron Paul supporters were slapped in the face. Well, very much so by the Republican National Committee, and I don't know who's advising them, but I think they made a strategically catastrophic mistake with that.
I think it was politically stupid. I mean, absolutely. But even more than that, the RNC disenfranchised millions of voters by refusing to seat duly elected delegates who supported Ron. Is there any kind of legal action that can be taken in such a case, or does a political party have carte blanche to pretty much do whatever it wants?
Pretty much so. The political parties have carte blanche to do what they want. And the problem with America today is there's only one party. There's not much difference between these Republicans and Democrats. They talk about a few different issues, and they dramatize it. One's going to cut spending. The other one's going to tax the wealthy, and they keep beating the bush and talk about how they're going to attack the debt. They all talk, they hate the debt, but they have more of it. They hate war, we have war. They hate taxes, we have more taxes. You know, it's watch what they do, not what they say. I say this, the biggest missing element in American politics today is that second party. We need a major third independent party.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you think we're ready for one? Do you think we're finally ready for another?
You know what? Let me tell you what. Their good example was the little guy with the ears, Ross Perot. Ross Perot got 20% of the vote, and he dropped out and didn't come back in with 4 weeks left in the campaign. And the bottom line was, no offense to Ross Perot, he really didn't have a program. He just talked about the giant sucking sound with NAFTA. The truth of the matter is, there was the foundation of a major third party that could have been orchestrated and brought. But what happens, the two major parties, they go ahead and they assume and they consume this party, And that's what happened with the Tea Party. I think the Tea Party had a chance of being an independent entity, but they let the Republicans woo them because they wanted to beat the Democrats. Well, the bottom line was these Tea Party people wanted to beat the Democrats, but they lost their own identity in doing it, and that was a shame. Now you have nothing more but a Tea Party faction of the Republican Party, and quite frankly, it may not be enough. Here's the bottom line here. 53% of the American taxpayers pay taxes. 47% of American taxpayers pay no federal income tax. My God, you're one-on-one now. How long can this thing survive? Now, they say the federal budget deficit is $1.3 trillion. Brent, I'm telling you and your listeners, they're lying to us. Because, you see, the accounting principles of the federal system do not include retirement funds in their assessments and in their analysis. Keep this in mind. The annual budget deficits of Medicare and Social Security are $3.7 trillion a year.
Oh, they're definitely
this country is going.
They're definitely massaging.
We're going down $5 trillion a year. $5 trillion.
Yeah,
we're adding new debt a year. Now we have this fancy legislation. Remember, to get by the last debt load and the down to credit rating went down on us. So all the politicians got together and they passed this tough legislation that's going to take effect in January 2013. Now I'm reading articles in the paper where the newspaper's advising them they can't do that. They can't have these automatic spending cuts. They can't have some of these tax benefits rescinded. If they do that, the economy is going to collapse. Congress got to expand the debt limit. Congress is going to have to find another way to do it. The point I'm making to you is this. All those politicians did was get out from under the gun a year ago. They kept piling on debt. Now you have a bigger debt, and what you have is a managed debt nation called the United States of America. We are the biggest debtor nation in the world. And it's going to come home to roost. Now, here's what I have predicted this. And here's the scenario that I think may happen. Now, I wrote a little article, and I do some public speaking, and they're getting upset about this public speaking. I better be careful. They'll put me back in prison. But people are starting to call me out to speak, and I'm going on speaking engagements. But the point I'm making to them is this. You have a situation now developing where with this debt, you had China, Russia, and Japan, and I can't hear you. You're breaking up. Can you hear me?
I hear you. I hear you fine, Jim.
I hear you.
Okay. China, Russia, and Japan, I think in France, they all conducted a secret meeting. And that secret meeting was to create another currency just for the purchase of oil. Now, the CIA come out and said, Traficant about my article. Oh, he don't know what he's talking about. This happened. I have good people would rely on me, and they'd send me information.
Congressman Traficant, I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what would be the one thing that you would recommend the average American citizen to learn and do to help restore our constitutional republic?
Mike, that's a hell of a question. I think number one is to know their rights. To read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, to know what the government is about, then they would get upset enough to do something. I don't think most Americans understand the parameters under which they live as a society, a member of a society. And I think that's the first thing they should do. And second of all, is vote very carefully and speak out if you're not satisfied with either party and move to mobilize a third party in this country. It's either going to be a political resolution or a military resolution. And I suggest and I recommend and endorse a political solution, certainly not a military one.
You know, Jim, on that point, do you think there's going to be a second American revolution? Do you think the people are getting to the point that they're going to say, hey,
yes, I think there will be a second American revolution. I think it will be a mass political upheaval, and I think it will come over our taxes. It will be. That's what the Tea Party was founded over years ago. And this whole system of taxing and punishing the American people with a tax code that's oppressive, with the regulations that make it impossible to make a profit. We're a capitalist system, Brent. We're not a communist socialist system. And it's time to get back to our capitalist roots. And there's nothing wrong with making a profit. It's not a dirty word. We should be encouraging entrepreneurs to invest money. That's where people get jobs, not through the government.
I'm right there with you.
And you can't do that with oppressive investment taxes. Under the Tozan Traficant bill that we had, there's no tax on investment. For example, you buy a house, you pay the taxes, add it in. You buy a duplex to rent it, there's no tax.
Yeah.
None. No federal tax on an investment.
Yeah,
when you're investing money in a plant, or you're investing money in a commercial pursuit, there's no tax on that investment, number one. And number two, there's no tax on your capital gains. We want to reward people for investing their money in America, and it will bring companies home to America if America would become friendly again, and America would reward investors and reward Americans who work hard.
You're talking common sense, which of course is not allowed in Washington, D.C. We got about a minute left. We got about a minute left. I understand you're writing a book.
Yeah, I have a book out called America's Last Minute Man. It's just a compilation of my 1-minute speeches I made in Congress, and it's broken up into 25 chapters. It's quite interesting. If anybody's interested, they could look, I think, at Barnes & Noble online at americaslastminuteman.com. I'm not sure, but I think we finally got it there. The bookstores won't take my book. I guess I'm too controversial, but we may have had a breakthrough with Barnes & Noble. But Brent, many of the things that I predicted, such as the demise of the auto industry, that's occurred. The wars have occurred. You know, I was one of the few members of Congress that not only voted against Desert Storm, I voted against Desert Shield. I said, listen,
Jim, as much as I hate to do it, I have to cut. I must apologize. I have to cut you off. I'm up against the clock. I want to give out your website, www.jim-traficant.com. jim-traficant.com. We will have you back. Thank you so much for being with us. God bless you, Jim.
You know what, Brent? I don't even know if that's my website. People got so many websites.
Yeah, it is.
Thanks, partner, and thank you, and I'll come back on your show.
Thank you. God bless.
Joe, bye now.